Okay, kiddos, we're gonna start up and go ahead and go. We're gonna kind of review the colonial prisoners of war real quick like, so if you want to get in your notes there, you can. We're just kind of got to go through this a little bit. We mentioned yesterday that as the Revolutionary War raged in the South, thousands of colonial prisoners were being held on 16 retired British warships. Where were they docked again, Emily? Do you remember? Where were those warships docked that were retired that held those thousands of colonial prisoners? Which one?
I know which one, but...
If you think of directions, you have a 1 in 4 chance.
I know. Is it? I know east.
East River, very good. Now, we mentioned that these prisoners that were on these 16 retired warships were from every theater of the war. They weren't just from one particular area. And these ships were anchored in the East River, as Emily said. They had taken their masts and the canvas from the masts. Their rigging all had been stripped off, and their gun ports had been sealed shut. And we mentioned that in the glory days of when these ships were actually working vessels, they had a crew of about 350 men. And now each one's packed with as many as 1,400 prisoners who are all below deck. We said that other than British guards, the only humanitarian allowed in the ships was Elizabeth Burgeon. She's going to be a witness to what takes place on these ships. They did allow her to bring food and supplies and actually comfort to the men, and only because she was a woman did they allow her on the ship. Because of security and concerns, they would never allow a man to perform those types of duties. Now, Miss Bergen was absolutely horrified at the conditions in which the men were held prisoner on those ships. The example was they had undercooked meat with wormy bread. Disease was rampant among the prisoners, some contagious. The air was so thick below deck that candles couldn't even be lit because there was that much of a lack of oxygen. And there was no ventilation, leading to about 10 to 12 deaths daily. And each morning would begin for the prisoners with the same grim command from the British Guards saying, quote, "Rebels, turn out your dead." And the dead were taken daily off the ships and buried right on the shoreline. We did say that they did ask for volunteers, prisoners to volunteer with burial detail, and although it seemed like a grim job, many were anxious so they could get out of the ship for a period of time. We also mentioned that each prisoner really was given the opportunity to join the British Navy and swear their allegiance to the king. And if they did that, they would be immediately set free. And I said, according to statistics, about 95% of those prisoners of war chose an agonizing death over becoming a traitor to the colonies. Now, this is kind of where we start today. The possibility of escape for these prisoners was nearly impossible, and it would be incredibly risky. Because obviously if you tried to escape, you would give the British Guards the, justification to what? Shoot you, okay? Now, the only way they were going to get a chance to escape would be if they got some help from the outside. And this outside help is actually going to come in the form of Elizabeth Burgeon. And what she did is she devised a plan to free these prisoners of war that were housed on the ships. Kind of an interesting plan because she's one person. So she took a little bit of a page off of our who was our rough and rugged lady that had a plan to free her children herself? Nancy Hart. What did she do to try to free those particular got them drunked up? Well, what Burgeon did is she actually smuggled in drugs, and she smuggled them inside a book, and she would give them to a prisoner, for example, in the book that she brought him to read. And inside the book would be the drugs and instructions on how to slip the drugs into the guard's beer at night to leave them incapacitated. So these, beer was kind of the drink of choice, as much as maybe water was in those days. And so these guards would have a couple of beers at night, and Elizabeth Burgeon would sneak in these drugs and instructions on how to put these drugs in the guard's beer at night to leave them incapacitated. Well, after the guard would consume the beer and the drug, they would pass out, and they would take the key from the guard that opened the top side opening, and that would be the trap door, so to speak, that went from the lower deck to the main deck where there was fresh air. So, again, the plan was to give these prisoners drugs inside a book she brought them to read. They were going to slip the drugs into the guards' beer at night, leave them incapacitated. Once they consumed their beer and their drugs, they would pass out, and the key was taken by the prisoners, and they would open the top side door, trap door. Well, as a result of this successful endeavor, many men actually escaped into the waiting boats that were provided by Miss Bergen. What she would do is she would go get some Patriot followers, and she would talk to them about her plan, and they would actually bring rescue boats into and around those ships at night and take those prisoners off those ships that the plan worked for and take them to safety. Now, I mean, there's a lot of colonial prisoners there, so it's not like she got every one of them off the ship with this type of plan. But they did estimate that she probably rescued as many as 200 during the next few weeks using this same tactic until she was discovered by British officials. Probably wouldn't take you too much time to discover what was happening. But she did get about 200 prisoners off those boats during the weeks that she used this scheme. Now I'll tell you what, the British officials were so upset at Elizabeth Bergen that they put a price on her head as of 200 British pounds. They were so upset that they put a bounty on her head of 200 pounds. Now if you have a bounty on your head, what does that mean? The old West days. Reward. Yeah, 200 British pounds, blank or blank. Dead or alive, Bon Jovi, dead or alive, okay? Now, if you want to get an idea at that time how much 200 pounds was, 200 pounds was as much as a British soldier could earn working 20 years in the military. That's how big of a bounty they had on her head because they were upset that she had done this. So, the British officials put a price of 200 British pounds on Elizabeth Bergen's head, and that was as much as a British soldier could earn working 20 years in the military. Well, once they kind of caught on and Elizabeth Bergen knew she was cooked, she escaped from New York in that East River area, never did catch her, and she was so well received for her efforts that George Washington, after the Revolutionary War, gave her a military pension for the rest of her life. So that was pretty big. So Elizabeth Bergen escaped from New York and was given a military pension from George Washington after the Revolutionary War ended for her contribution to the cause. So she was very well liked. Now, we talk about, this is an interesting statistic, she got 200 out, and like I mentioned, that wasn't any large number in comparison. During the course of the American Revolution, they estimated over a 6-year period that between 10,000 and 12,000 colonists died on those 16 prison ships. In a 6-year period, think about that, they estimated that between 10,000 and 12,000 colonial prisoners of war died on those ships. Now, guess in that 6-year period of time of fighting the Revolutionary War, how many colonial patriots were killed? Now think there were between 10 and 12,000 prisoners of war that died on those ships in that 6-year period. In that same 6-year period of fighting, guess how many, Taylor, guess how many patriots were killed in battle? Kind of look at, see where we're going. 10 to 12,000 died in the prison camps, so what would you think probably died in battle? How much, what did you say? No, it's not. She's right. 8,000. So more colonial patriots died in prison camps than died losing their life in battle. 10 to 12,000 versus 8,000. So Taylor's exactly right. Okay? A lot of people would think, oh, gee, you know, most of them probably got killed in battle. Actually, less killed in battle than died in those prison camps. Okay, are we doing very well in the South? Not very well. And so that brings us to our next subtopic, which is continued failure in the South. Continued failure. Now actually, as the Revolutionary War rages in the South, American soldiers are falling in alarming numbers. Okay, we're getting our tails kicked in the South. Just getting our tails kicked. And I'm going to tell you about a battle called the Battle of Camden, which occurred in South Carolina on August 16th, 1780. Okay, the Battle of Camden occurred in South Carolina, and it occurred on August 16th, 1780. Battle of Camden in South Carolina. Now in this particular battle, approximately 4,000 American patriots and militia are launching a major attack against 2,500 British soldiers. So it's going to be 4,000 patriots versus about 2,500 British at the Battle of Camden. Now the British are under the command of General Charles Cornwallis, who we've talked about before, who is a very good military commander. So in the Battle of Camden, the British are going to be commanded by General Charles Cornwallis, who's a very good commander. And although the Patriots outnumber the British, 4,000 to 2,500, they're going to be no match for Cornwallis and the 2,500 British. And this defeat at Camden, according to historians, was self-inflicted by the Patriots. What does that mean, self-inflicted? You got a self-inflicted knife wound, what does that mean? To stab yourself. So what historians are saying, if this defeat that the Patriots took at Camden was self-inflicted, means they caused it themselves. And it's kind of an interesting story in itself. The day before the battle, these American colonists are just starving to death. You know, the food's not real plentiful. And they come upon a stash of peaches. Okay? And so obviously they're hungry and they eat these peaches. Well, unfortunately, these peaches were not ripe yet. You ever ate an unripe peach? What's that happens to you? You get sick, stomach problems, etc. Well, you can imagine you were conservative. You were hungry for a peach, and Maddie ate one. Well, these guys were starving to death. You can imagine when they got into that stash of peaches, what they did. And they were all unripe peaches. And they became, many of them, deathly ill during this Battle of Camden. Can you imagine fighting a battle when you're sicker than a dog on eating too many unripe peaches? Well, there's no question that because they were sick during the battle, it contributed to their loss. And of the 4,000 American patriots that fought in the battle, 2,000 were either killed, wounded, or captured. Half of the force was killed, wounded, or captured by less than almost half as many men on the British side. So again, because of their bad choice of eating a stash of unripe peaches, the Patriot militia got sick, became deathly ill during the battle, and their sickness contributed to their loss, in which 2,000 approximately Patriots were either killed, wounded, or captured. Well, it's not looking good. It looks at this point after the Battle of Camden that the South is going to fall to the British, the North is soon to follow, and the Revolutionary War is going to be over in favor of Great Britain. That's what it looks like after the Battle of Camden. Well, as they're retreating from this Battle of Camden, the colonists are desperately attempting to pick up as much equipment and ammunition as they can as they're retreating, because what don't they want that stuff to happen to them? Go to the British. So as they're retreating out of Camden after getting their tails kicked, I mean, they're picking up everything of any value that would help the British and trying to pack it with them. Now, among these men that are trying to pick up as much equipment as possible was a supersized patriot by the name of Peter Francisco. He was a supersized patriot. He was so big that he had the nickname among the men as the Virginia Giant. They called him the Virginia Giant. Obviously telling you where he was from, sort of. And he must have been pretty big to get the name the Virginia Giant. And historians and history research tells us that Peter Francisco, the Virginia Giant, stood about 6'6" and weighed about 280 pounds. Is a big guy, big fella. He was 6'6" tall and weighed about 280 pounds. He's a big fella. Now you gotta remember, back in those days were people as big as they are now, they were not even close. I mean, you didn't see 7-footers, didn't have basketball teams. I mean, people, your average man was probably 5'9", 150. I mean, that's kind of where you were in those days. Maybe not, but you know, whatever. But there weren't very many 6'6", 280-pound men anywhere in the colonies, and that's why he stood out so much. Now, according to historians, it was written that during that retreat, in which the Patriots were trying to pick up as much equipment as possible, that Francisco actually picked up a cannon that weighed 1,100 pounds and hoisted it on his shoulder and took it away from the British and took it out of there. Now, there is a postage stamp you can buy, I might even have one if I look, that shows Peter Francisco with that big cannon over his shoulder. And it seems like an exaggeration, but history points that because of the eyewitness accounts, etc., that it was probably true, that he hoisted up an 1,100-pound cannon, put it on his shoulders, and took it so the British couldn't get it.
How many accounts of this are there?
Several, or they wouldn't have it in history. They wouldn't have a postage stamp of a guy if it wasn't true. But it's a little legend, but according to many, many written accounts on that day of witnesses, that's what happened. Now, George Washington was so impressed with Peter Francisco even before this event that he referred to him as a one-man army. That's what he called it. George Washington called Peter Francisco a one-man army. Now, if you look at the name, is that an English name? Is that a Netherlands type name? Anybody know where he might have come from? It's figured, it wasn't known for sure. Close. Portugal. Very good, yeah. It was figured that Peter Francisco was born in Portugal. But nobody really knew or ever found out, or he never stated how or why he ever ended up in America. But he settled where? In Virginia. But nobody knows really his story, other than they believe he was born in Portugal, but nobody knows why or how or for what reason he ever ended up in America. Well, despite the fearless and ferocious people like Peter Francisco, the British continue to press on in the South. And so we're going to need, we're being the colonists are going to have to change their strategy, their military strategy, or we're going to have problems. What they're doing now is not working, which takes us to the next subtopic, which is a change in military strategy. The Patriot colonists are going to have to change their way of doing things, because what they're doing in the South is not working. Okay? So we're going to have to see a change in American military strategy if we're going to get this thing turned around in the South. Okay? Now, once the Redcoats celebrated their victory at Camden, they marched northward towards Charlotte, North Carolina. So once the Redcoats celebrated their victory at Camden, they began a march towards Charlotte, North Carolina. Well, the Americans at this point, think about it, they can't engage the British and hope to win. They can't beat the British with almost twice as many soldiers. And so George Washington decides he's going to have to assign someone pretty bright and pretty strategic to lead the Southern campaign on the part of the Patriots. And Washington chooses General Nathaniel Greene to be the guy that's going to take over Patriot forces in the South, and he's going to expect Nathaniel Greene to come up with some military strategy that's going to work better than what's happening right now. Because what they're doing right now just isn't working at all. So at this point in the war, Washington assigns a new general to lead the Southern campaign, a general by the name of Nathaniel Greene. Now, what General Greene did is he changed the military strategy from engaging the British and suffering losses to what he called a hit and run campaign. Hit and run campaign. And he thought that his hit and run campaign might kind of wear out the British Army. Okay, this hit and run campaign would wear out the British Army. Now, basically what we're saying here, kids, is the Patriots aren't going to attempt to win any major battle against the British. Because if they were majorly defeated trying to win a major battle, the South would be gone, they'd move to the North, that being the British, and the war would be over. So they're not trying to win any major battle against the British, because a major battle could result in a major defeat. And a major defeat at the hand of the Redcoats at this stage in the war would result in a lost revolution. So this series of hit and run, what he's going to do, it's like if I'm going to get in a fight with Morgan because he's bigger than I am and he's tougher than I am, and if I let Morgan get a hold of me and he gets me down to the ground, he's going to beat the hell out of me and I'm going to lose the revolution. So I'm going to engage Morgan. When Morgan comes at me, I'm going to pop him in the nose a couple times, then I'm going to run about 20 feet back. I'm going to look at him and egg him on. This is the old Muhammad Ali rope-a-dope against George Foreman, where Muhammad Ali just sat in the corner like this and let George Foreman just beat the hell out of his arms. And what did George Foreman do? He got tired. And when Ali thought, back in the 70s, when Ali thought that Foreman was too tired, then he came out and started punching him, knocked Foreman out, upset of the century. Ali retains his heavyweight championship of the world, which is another story we'll tell you more about next year. But that was the hit and run. Rope-a-dope is what Ali called this. Okay? So what the colonial army is going to do is they're going to basically harass General Cornwallis and his British army, and each skirmish they have is going to result in a loss. In other words, he may hit me a few times as I punch him a few times, but I'm going to